he's going to appoint his own attorney general as president. And, well, there isn't supposed to be too much influence by the president in criminal affairs. But, Trump's attorney general, is he really going to prioritize those cases? So that's what I mean by squash them.
Let's talk about Donald Trump, shall we? Because he's been in a hearing today of a hush money paid to the adult film actress Stormy Daniels. He's pleaded not guilty to 34 counts of fraud related to an alleged cover-up of that payment in his accounts. Let's hear from him.
Thank you very much. Judge Engoron has done a terrible disservice to the state of New York. What he's done is terrible. Businesses are fleeing, and you see that. We just released a statement on Truth. Businesses are fleeing, and crime is flourishing all over the state, and what he's done is such a disservice and should never be allowed to happen again. New York State is being battered by his decision. So I greatly respect the decision of the appellate division, and I'll post either $175 million in cash or bonds or security or whatever is necessary very quickly within the 10 days. And I thank the appellate division for acting quickly. But Judge Engoron is a disgrace to this country, and this should not be allowed to happen. Thank you very much.
Excuse me while I just have a coughing fit on air. But anyway, just to explain what's going on. So he was in a hearing today of a hush money paid to the adult film actress Stormy Daniels. And separately, during a break in that hearing, he received some good news, which was an appeals court had given him a slight reprieve in paying his bond in a separate civil fraud trial. Well, let's talk to David Charter, the US editor of The Times. David, good to speak to you. I hope you haven't got a cough like mine tonight.
No, but it's really interesting how the Trump cases are totally overlapping with each other, let alone the election in America, because, of course, he tries to maximize the PR from them to bring the donations flooding into his legal fund. But you're absolutely right. So what happened today was in the criminal case, which is going to be the first criminal case against him. The judge ruled that it's going to start on April the 15th for these hush money payments, allegedly to Stormy Daniels to keep her quiet in the run-up to the 2016 election. But it was while he was in that case that the news came through that he did not have to meet a huge bond payment to protect his properties from being seized in the New York civil case, where he's already been found liable for fraud, for lying about the values of his properties for years and years to get better favorable terms from bankers and insurers and so on. So he was facing the New York Attorney General putting a padlock on some of his prized possessions, like a golf club in Westchester she had her eye on, or a building in Wall Street that she's mentioned might be used to pay this fine, this massive fine that he faces. But he wanted to appeal the fine. The court had said you've got to put up the same amount as the fine, and it's $354 million plus $100 million interest. You've got to put all that up. He successfully appealed, and the appeal court at the very last minute, the 11th hour, said, no, it was too high. He's going to have another 10 days, and it's only going to be $175 million that he's got to put up in order to appeal against it and to hold off the New York authorities from seizing his property. So that was a big win for Trump, a really big win today on that case. But it wasn't a win. It was actually a setback in the criminal case because they wanted to delay it by 3 months, and the judge said, no, we're going ahead in 3 weeks.
It's difficult to keep up, isn't it, of all these different court cases? Because, you know, what will confuse a lot of people today is you're talking about Stormy Daniels, the adult film actress on one hand, and then a ruling comes through, like you say, while there's a pause in proceedings about another criminal case that he's also dealing with. And the numbers involved in this, David, are enormous. I mean, a reduced bond of $175 million and the actual enforcement that he's got to pay in theory still, even though it's going to appeal, is $464 million. And there's no suggestion that Trump has that sort of money. He
certainly has liquidity to pretty much that value, but, well, that's what he says. And then all of what Trump says in reality are distant cousins normally at best. So he that's why he's appealing it. He's appealing against it. And the appellate court reducing the bond by half, effectively, of the original fine to 175 million, does suggest a favourable move in his direction for that case, which is actually a civil case. When we talk about his 4 criminal cases, they're all different cases. This was the earlier civil case that he lost.
Yeah.
And all the criminal cases are yet to come. His lawyers have this strategy of delaying and obfuscation to try and put them back after the election. They think if they get them so entangled in the hot phase of the general election that's coming up in November, that they just won't be able to run these trials properly, because, you've got the Republican Party convention in July when Trump is going to be confirmed as the candidate and unveil his running mate, his VP. Would they dare to go up against that, requiring his presence in court?
Yeah.
Well, his lawyers would argue strongly against it. And, of course, it would be maximum PR value for Trump to say this is an egregious election interference, which is his argument, of course, against forestalling these criminal cases, some of which, probably 3 of them, 3 out of the 4, he could squash them if he became president again. So that's the long-term plan.
Oh, okay. So he could squash 3 out of 4 of the rulings.
Possibly 3.
Which is the one that he could not squash?
That's the. Let me think now. So we got the 2 election interference.
That's just
cases,
it. There are so many.
Georgia, which is a state case. Yeah, we got the state. He could squash probably the federal ones, which is election interference leading to the January the 6th riots at the U.S. Capitol.
Right.
He's facing some charges in connection with that. That's a federal case. The other federal case is the retention of secret documents after the presidency. So those 2 federal cases are under the auspices of the Attorney General. So he's going to appoint his own Attorney General as president. And, well, there isn't supposed to be too much influence by the president in criminal affairs. But, Trump's Attorney General, is he really going to prioritize those cases? So that's what I mean by squash them. And that might lead to the collapse of the Georgia case, because what we're waiting to hear actually a ruling from the Supreme Court on whether Trump has presidential immunity. So everything he did while he was president, does he have protection from prosecution? So if that goes his way, that will probably end the Georgia election interference case, because all of that stuff leading up to January the 6th and phoning up the state secretary in Georgia and saying, find me 11,780 votes, all of that was when he was president. And he can claim that he was acting as a president to, what he claims is to ensure a fair election. So there we go. But, I mean, that's his plan, to try and keep it going to the presidency.
How is this Stormy Daniels case still going on? Why are we still talking about Stormy Daniels now when we first heard about her 3 years ago?
Yes, this is the 4th criminal case, the one he hasn't been able to stop. And we now know it's going ahead on April the 15th. So this is one criminal case that will go ahead against Trump, go to trial and reach a verdict before the election. And it's because it involves the prosecution under some tax measures, as in he lied on his tax return what the money was used for. So via many charges have been built up over different entries in legal filings to the tax authorities to conceal that the money was used to pay off Stormy Daniels, and that's the way that this prosecutor, an elected Democrat, I have to say, like in the Georgia case, another elected Democratic prosecutor, which Trump is very quick to point out all the time, into a criminal case of serious charges. But that will be questioned rigorously in the case. His lawyers say there's no way that tax offences should be such serious charges against my client, because they're normally charged at a lower level called misdemeanors, which are carry nothing like the seriousness of a felony, which is what he's been charged with.
Well, absolutely fascinating to catch up with you, David. Always good. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Yeah, thank you.
David Charter, US editor of The Times. Fascinating, wasn't it, to hear David saying that if he did take the presidency, 3 of the 4 criminal cases could be dismissed, just leaving 1 if he did get himself into the White House again. So there's a lot of movement that could come from these cases, but just leaving that 1 that could leave him in a certain amount of trouble. But of course, as we've known, we've spoken about before, you can be a US president from jail if that turns out to be the case.